I remember the exact moment my whole world ended. It was a Tuesday evening, just after 7 o'clock, and we were all sitting around the long dining table at my in-laws' house. The food was warm, the candles were lit, and everything looked peaceful. Then, my sister-in-law, Vanessa, pushed back her chair and stood up. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, and she pointed her finger directly at me across the table. Her voice broke as she said the words that no man ever wants to hear. He's the one who got me pregnant. The entire room went completely silent. My wife, Dana, turned to look at me, and I watched the love drain out of her eyes in real time. That night she packed a bag and left. Her family called me a monster. And within 48 hours, I had lost everything I had spent a decade building. If you enjoy dramatic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Francisko's Stories for more. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes any sense without understanding who I was and what my life looked like before that dinner destroyed it. My name is Marcus. I am 37 years old. I grew up in a small town about 2 hours outside the city, and I came from a family that did not have much. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses. They were good people, honest and hardworking, and they raised me to believe that a man's reputation was his most valuable possession. That word, reputation, is going to matter a lot in this story. I met Dana when I was 26. She was 24. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, and I remember thinking she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. She had this warmth about her. She laughed easily. She was kind to everyone in the room, not just to the people she already knew. We talked for 4 hours that night, standing by the kitchen counter, barely touching our drinks, and by the end of the evening, I knew she was someone special. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I saved for 8 months to buy the ring. It was not the biggest ring in the world, but it was everything I had, and she cried when she saw it. We got married on a Saturday in September, and it was one of the best days of my life. Our wedding was small, just family and close friends, and I remember standing at the altar watching her walk toward me and feeling like the luckiest man alive. We built a life together. We bought a house in the suburbs. Dana worked as a school administrator. I worked in logistics management for a mid-sized company. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. We had plans. We talked about children, about travel, about growing old together. We had arguments sometimes, like every couple does, but we always came back to each other. We had a good marriage. I believe that with everything in my heart. Now, Dana's family. I need to explain Dana's family, because they are central to everything that happened. Her parents, Robert and Linda, were both retired. Robert had been an engineer. Linda had been a nurse. They were decent people on the surface, but they had a particular way about them. They were the kind of family that closed ranks the moment any one of them felt threatened. They were fiercely protective of each other, sometimes to an unhealthy degree. Family loyalty in their world meant believing whatever a family member told you. No questions asked. I'd seen this dynamic play out before, usually in small ways, but I had never imagined it would one day be turned against me. Dana had one sibling, a younger sister named Vanessa. Vanessa was 28 at the time of the dinner. She was pretty, charming, and funny in small doses, but she was also wildly irresponsible. She had jumped from one relationship to the next her entire adult life. She could never hold down a steady job. She borrowed money from her parents regularly and rarely paid it back. Dana would sometimes vent to me about Vanessa's behavior, about how her sister always managed to find a way out of consequences, about how their parents always made excuses for her. Vanessa had a talent for drama. She could turn any situation into a story where she was the victim and someone else was the villain. I knew all of this about Vanessa, but I never thought it would matter to me personally. She and I had a perfectly civil relationship. We were not close. We did not spend time together outside of family events. We exchanged pleasantries at holidays and birthday dinners, and that was essentially the full extent of it. I did not dislike her. I simply kept a polite distance. The way you do with a family member you know is complicated. In the months leading up to that dinner, I had noticed that Vanessa seemed different. She was quieter than usual. There was a tension in her face at family gatherings that I had not seen before. I mentioned it once to Dana, and Donna said that Vanessa had been going through something, but that she did not know the full details. I did not push the subject. It was not my business. I also noticed something else, though I did not connect the dots at the time. Vanessa had a man in her life that the family did not approve of. She had mentioned him briefly once or twice, just a first name, someone she described as complicated. Dana told me that her parents had met him once and had not liked him. Apparently he was significantly older than Vanessa, already had children from a previous relationship, and was not the kind of person Robert and Linda wanted their daughter involved with. From what I understood, they had made their feelings very clear, and Vanessa had responded by keeping him hidden from everyone. None of this felt particularly significant to me at the time. People have complicated romantic lives. I filed it away and moved on. And then came that Tuesday evening in November. It had started like any other family dinner at Robert and Linda's house. Donna and I arrived around 6. Her parents greeted us at the door. Linda had made a roast. Robert had opened a bottle of wine. Vanessa was already there when we arrived, sitting in the living room with her arms crossed and a look on her face that I now recognize as someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. We all sat down at the table. The conversation was normal at first. Linda asked about our house. Robert talked about a neighbor dispute he was dealing with. Donna mentioned something about a new policy at work. I talked briefly about a project I had been managing. It was ordinary. Completely ordinary. The food was halfway finished when the atmosphere shifted. Vanessa had been unusually quiet through most of dinner. She kept picking at her food without really eating. Her jaw was tight. She was not looking at anyone. I noticed it but said nothing. I assumed she was in one of her moods. And then, without any warning, she pushed back her chair and stood up. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor made everyone look up. She stood there for a moment, her hands flat on the table, her eyes fixed on me, and then she pointed, her finger aimed directly at my face from across the table. "I have something to say," she said. Her voice was shaking. "And I need everyone to hear it." Robert set down his fork. Linda reached for Dana's arm. Dana turned to look at Vanessa with an expression of complete confusion, and then Vanessa said it. "He's the one who got me pregnant." Those 6 words. I remember the exact sound they made in the room. I remember how the air seemed to change, the way it does right before a storm. Complete silence. I felt something cold move through my entire body. I could not speak. I could not move. I simply stared at her as if I had heard her wrong, as if there had been some kind of terrible translation error between her mouth and my brain. "What?" I finally managed. "You heard me," she said. Her eyes were red now. She was crying or performing tears, and in that moment I could not tell which it was. "I am pregnant, and it is yours." The silence lasted another second, and then it shattered. Linda gasped. Robert stood up from his chair. Donna went completely white. "That's not true," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me because nothing inside me felt steady. "That's an absolute lie." "Don't you dare call me a liar," Vanessa said, and her voice broke again. "Don't you dare. I came here tonight to tell the truth, and this is the truth." Dana turned to look at me. The expression on her face was something I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was a kind of horrified blankness, like someone had just pulled the floor out from under her and she had not yet registered that she was falling. "Marcus," she said, "just my name, nothing else." "Dana, listen to me," I said. I reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "This is not true. I have never had any kind of relationship with Vanessa, not ever, not once. This is a lie." "Why would she lie about something like this?" Robert said. His voice was low and controlled, but there was something burning underneath it. He was looking at me the way a man looks at something he wants to destroy. "I don't know," I said, "but she is lying." "Get out of my house," Robert said. "Robert, please, get out of my house right now." I looked at Dana. She was staring at the table. Her hands were folded in her lap and she was very still. "Dana," I said, "please look at me. You know me. You know I would never do this." She looked up then. Her eyes were full of tears. "I don't know what I know right now," she said quietly. I left. I drove home alone, and I sat in the driveway of our house for about 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. When I walked through the door, everything looked exactly the same as it always had. The shoes by the front door, the pictures on the hallway wall, the half-finished book Dana had left face down on the coffee table. Everything was the same and everything was completely different. Around 11 o'clock that night, I heard Dana's car pull into the driveway. I went to the door. She walked in without looking at me and went straight to the bedroom. I followed her. She was pulling a bag out of the closet when I walked in. "Dana, please don't do this," I said. "Please just talk to me." She kept folding clothes. She did not look at me. "I can't be here right now," she said. "You cannot honestly believe what she said." She stopped then. She set down the shirt she was folding and turned to face me. Her eyes were red and swollen. "I don't know what to believe," she said, "but I need space. I cannot be in this house tonight. So you're going to take your sister's word over mine." I didn't say that. "You're packing a bag, Dana." She picked the shirt back up. "I just need time," she said. "Please give me time." She was gone within the hour. She went back to her parents' house, and with that the slow collapse of everything I had built began. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Dana and I exchanged brief text messages, but she refused to have a real conversation. Her responses were short and carefully worded. She was clearly talking to her family, and her family was clearly talking to her, and none of what was being said was helping me. Vanessa, it turned out, had also been telling other people. I did not discover the full extent of it immediately, but it came out piece by piece, like water seeping through a cracked wall. She had told a cousin. The cousin had told another cousin. Someone in that chain had apparently mentioned it to people outside the family, because within a week I was getting strange looks from neighbors we had socialized with, and a close friend of mine called to tell me he had heard something and wanted to ask me directly if it was true. I told him it was not true. I told everyone who asked that it was not true. But the honest reality is that there is almost no way to effectively defend yourself against an accusation like that one. The moment the words are spoken, a seed is planted, and no amount of denial can fully pull it out of the ground. People hear an accusation and file it somewhere in their minds, and even if they later hear it was false, the ghost of the original story never fully disappears. I went to work every day. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen and tried to function like a normal person. My boss noticed something was off, but was professional enough not to push. I barely ate. I barely slept. I would lie in bed on Dana's side of the mattress, which I started doing without realizing it, and I would stare at the ceiling and ask myself the same two questions over and over again through the night. Why did she do this? And how do I prove that none of it happened? The second question was the one that tortured me most, because the honest answer was that I had no idea how to prove it. You cannot produce evidence of something that did not happen. You cannot film your own innocence. All I had was my word, and apparently my word was worth very little to the people who mattered most to me. I tried to reach Vanessa directly. I sent her a message asking her to call me. She did not respond. I tried again a few days later. Still nothing. I wanted to ask her, in plain language, why she was doing this. I needed to understand the reason even if I never got an apology. Even if she refused to take back what she had said, I needed to look her in the face and understand what had driven her to do it. But she would not respond to me at all. Donna came home after 9 days. She came home, but she was not the same woman who had left. She moved through the house like someone who was still deciding whether she lived there. She slept beside me, but there was a distance between us that I could feel even when she was physically close. She had not said she believed Vanessa, but she had not said she believed me either. And that half-silence was somehow worse than anything else she could have done. If she had screamed at me, if she had told me directly that she thought I was guilty, I could have argued. I could have pushed back. But this quiet, suspended uncertainty was like a fog I could not fight my way through. We went to see a couples therapist. Her name was Dr. Okafor, and she was a calm, measured woman who was skilled at keeping difficult conversations from spiraling into something irreparable. But even Dr. Okafor could not unlock whatever had frozen inside Dana. Dana sat in those sessions like someone who was performing the idea of trying to work things out, while something deeper inside her had already started to withdraw. I later learned through a mutual friend that Donna was also having individual sessions with a different therapist. I do not know what was said in those sessions. I do not know what guidance she was receiving or what conclusions she was drawing. But I know that the weeks were passing and things between us were not getting better. They were getting quieter. And in our situation, quieter did not mean calmer. Quieter meant that the distance was hardening into something permanent. I lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. I know that because I weighed myself one morning and stood on the bathroom scale looking at the number for a long time. I had not been trying to lose weight. I had simply stopped tasting food. I had simply stopped feeling hungry. The body has a way of registering grief that the mind tries to manage, and my body was registering everything my mind was working overtime to contain. I called my mother once during this period. I had not told my parents what was happening because I did not want to worry them, and also because putting it into words for someone outside the situation made it feel more real in a way I was not sure I could handle. But one evening I found myself dialing her number without quite deciding to do it. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did. And when she said hello, when I heard her voice, something in me just broke. I did not cry. I did not get emotional in any dramatic way. I just sat there on the kitchen floor and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. My mother was never the kind of person to react immediately to difficult news. She listened first, fully, and then she spoke. And what she said was this: "Marcus, the truth has a way of surviving. It is slower than lies, but it is stronger. Don't stop standing for it." I held on to those words for the next several weeks like a rope over a cliff. And then, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, about 3.5 weeks after that dinner, my phone rang. The caller identified herself as a nurse at a private medical clinic not far from where we lived. She said she was calling at the request of a patient and that the matter was sensitive. She said she hoped I would be able to come in person at my earliest convenience. I asked who the patient was. She said she could not share that information over the phone. I asked if it was urgent. She said it was important and that it would be worth my time. I went the next morning. I remember sitting in the waiting room of that clinic and feeling a strange combination of nervousness and curiosity. I did not know what I was walking into. Part of me wondered if this was some kind of trap, if Vanessa had arranged something to make the situation even worse. But another part of me, some quieter, more hopeful part, felt that something was about to shift. A nurse eventually came to collect me and led me through a corridor and into a small consultation room with 2 chairs and a desk. A doctor came in a few minutes later. He introduced himself as Dr. Lim. He was a soft-spoken man with glasses and a careful, deliberate way of choosing his words. He began by confirming my identity. He asked me to verify my name and date of birth. I did. He made a note. Then he folded his hands on the desk and looked at me steadily. "I want to be transparent with you about why I've asked you here," he said. "I need to share some medical information that I believe you have a right to know, and I want to do that in a direct but sensitive way." I told him to go ahead. "Are you aware of a situation involving a family member of your wife?" he asked. I said that I was. "The patient in question has been receiving care at this clinic," he said. "During the course of that care, some information came to light that directly contradicts a claim that has apparently been made involving you. I'm sharing this because I believe it significantly affects your situation and because the patient has authorized me to speak with you." I sat very still. I did not want to say anything that might interrupt him. A standard part of the care process in situations like this involves confirming the timeline of a pregnancy, he continued. Based on the patient's confirmed gestational age and the date of conception, as we have been able to determine it medically, the conception took place approximately 14 to 15 weeks ago from today. He paused to let that land. "I need you to understand the significance of what I'm telling you," he said. "The timing of conception does not correspond to any period during which the patient claims the event involving you took place. The dates are inconsistent with the account that has been given." I stared at him. My brain was processing slowly, like a machine that had been given too many instructions at once. "Are you telling me," I said carefully, "that the dates do not match her story?" "I'm telling you that based on everything we know medically, the conception occurred during a period for which the patient's account involving you is inconsistent with the physical evidence," he said. "I cannot speak to who the biological father is. That is not information I have, but I can tell you with confidence that the timeline as described in the accusation made against you does not align with the medical facts." I sat in that chair for a long moment after he finished. I do not know exactly what I felt in that moment. It was not quite relief, because relief would have required some of the weight to lift, and at that point the weight had been sitting on me so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. It was something closer to vindication, mixed with a profound, exhausted grief. Because even if this information proved I was innocent, it did not give me back the 3.5 weeks I had already lost. It did not give me back the sleep or the weight or the look in Dana's eyes that night at the dinner table, or the moment my friend asked me on the phone if the rumors were true. I thanked Dr. Lim. I asked whether he would be willing to provide documentation that could be shared. He said the patient had authorized a written summary of the relevant medical findings, and he handed me a sealed envelope. I walked out of that clinic into the cold morning air and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could make myself move. I drove home. Dana was at work. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do next. My first instinct was to call Dana immediately, to tell her everything, to read her the contents of the document over the phone. Part of me wanted to do it fast, like tearing off a bandage, but I stopped myself. I had spent 3.5 weeks being disbelieved. I had spent 3.5 weeks watching an accusation spread through a family like a fire that nobody tried to put out. I was not going to bring this information to Dana alone and give the family the opportunity to find ways to dismiss it or reframe it or minimize it in private. I needed everyone in the same room. I needed there to be no escape route. I called Dr. Okafor, our couples therapist. I told her that I had received important medical information and that I needed to organize a meeting that included Dana and her parents and Vanessa, and that I would like that meeting to take place in her office if at all possible. Dr. Okafor was measured and professional. She said she could not compel anyone to attend, but that she understood the gravity of the situation and that she agreed a structured, neutral setting was the appropriate environment for this kind of conversation. She said she would reach out to Dana. I do not know exactly what Dr. Okafor said to Dana, but 2 days later, Dana agreed to a meeting. Her parents were harder. Robert refused at first, firmly and without much explanation, the way he refused things he considered beneath his dignity to engage with. Linda took longer, and Vanessa initially said she would not come under any circumstances. In the end, it was Dana who convinced them all. I do not know what she said. I do not know whether something had already begun to shift for her internally, whether some small part of her had started to question the story she had been handed. But she convinced them. They all agreed to come. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after my visit to the clinic. Dr. Okafor had arranged a larger room than usual for our sessions. There were 6 of us: Dr. Okafor, me, Dana, Robert, Linda, and Vanessa. I arrived first. I sat in a chair against the wall and waited. Robert and Linda arrived next. Robert walked in without looking at me and chose a seat at the opposite side of the room. Linda sat beside him. Her face was tight and carefully blank, the face of someone who has prepared themselves not to feel anything. Dana came in shortly after and sat beside her mother. She looked at me briefly when she walked in, just a glance, and I could not read what was behind it. Vanessa was last. She walked in and stopped in the doorway when she saw me sitting there. Something passed across her face, some complicated mix of emotions I did not have time to fully interpret. Then she walked to the remaining empty seat, sat down, crossed her arms, and fixed her gaze on the floor. Dr. Okafor opened the meeting by explaining that this was a space for honest and respectful communication, and that she expected everyone to allow others to finish speaking before responding. Robert visibly bristled at being given instructions, but he contained himself. Then Dr. Okafor turned to me and said I could share what I had come to share. I took the envelope out of the inside pocket of my jacket. I held it for a moment without opening it. I looked at each person in the room. I looked at Robert, whose jaw was set hard. I looked at Linda, whose hands were folded too neatly in her lap. I looked at Dana, who was watching me with an expression I could not quite name. And then I looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was looking at the envelope. The color had shifted in her face. I said calmly and clearly that I had been accused of something I did not do. I said that I had been carrying that accusation for almost 4 weeks. I said I had lost sleep, lost weight, and lost the trust of people I loved because of something that was not true. I said that I had spent those weeks trying to figure out how to prove a negative, how to defend myself against a lie when I had no evidence because there was nothing to produce evidence of. And then I said that I was no longer going to ask anyone to take my word for it. I handed the envelope to Dr. Okafor. She opened it carefully and read the contents quietly. Then she passed it to Dana. Dana read it. She read it once, then went back to the beginning and read it again. I watched her eyes move across the page. I watched them stop, and then she looked up slowly and turned to look at her sister. "Vanessa," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "These dates don't match." Vanessa uncrossed her arms. She shifted in her seat. She looked like someone who was trying to find an exit in a room with no doors. "Medical documents can be wrong," she said. Her voice was thin. "Vanessa." Dana's voice was firmer now. Robert leaned over and took the document from Dana's hands. He read it. His jaw tightened further. He read it again. Then he set it down on his knee and looked at his younger daughter with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not anger, exactly. It was something more complicated than that. It was the expression of a man who was beginning to understand that he had said and done things that could not be unsaid or undone. The room was very quiet. And then Vanessa started to cry. Not the performance she had delivered at the dinner table. These were different tears. These were the tears of someone who has finally run out of the energy required to hold a lie together. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders trembled, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words I'd spent almost 4 weeks waiting to hear. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry. It wasn't him. I'm so sorry." The room absorbed this in stages. Robert said nothing. Linda put a hand over her mouth. Dana sat completely still, her hands in her lap, staring at her sister. "Who is it?" Dana asked. Her voice was barely audible. Vanessa did not answer immediately. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She took a shaking breath. "It's Daniel," she said. Daniel, the man the family did not approve of. The man who was older, who already had children, who Robert and Linda had met once and dismissed. The man Vanessa had been seeing in secret because she knew her family would react badly. The man she had apparently been deeply involved with, despite everything, and who had, it seemed, made it very clear that he was not prepared to be responsible for what had happened. Dr. Okafor spoke quietly. She asked Vanessa to explain in her own words what had led to the accusation. What came out over the next 30 minutes was one of the saddest and most infuriating things I've ever sat through. Vanessa talked slowly, haltingly, with long pauses between sentences. She talked like someone dismantling a building they had constructed themselves, brick by brick, knowing that each brick they removed was bringing the whole thing closer to the ground. She and Daniel had been seeing each other for about 7 months. She had fallen for him hard and fast, the way Vanessa apparently did with men. She had known from early on that the relationship had complications. He was not separated from his previous partner in any clean or final way. He had 2 young children. He was not a stable or reliable presence, but she had convinced herself that none of that mattered, that he was different with her, that what they had was real. When she found out she was pregnant, she had gone to him immediately. She had been nervous, but also, somewhere underneath the nerves, hopeful. She had thought, or wanted to think, that the news might change things, that it might be the thing that made him commit. Instead, he had reacted with cold, immediate practicality. He told her directly that he was not going to be involved. He told her she needed to handle it. He told her that if she tried to hold him responsible publicly, he would deny everything, and she would be left alone to deal with the fallout. He made it clear that he had more to protect than she did, and that he intended to protect it. She had been devastated. She described those days after his reaction as the loneliest of her life. She was carrying a pregnancy she had not planned for, and she had just been completely abandoned by the man responsible. She had not known what to do. She could not tell her parents the truth about Daniel, because they already disliked him, and she could not face the weight of their reaction on top of everything else she was already carrying. She could not face the humiliation of admitting that she had been foolish enough to fall for someone like him, that she had ignored every warning sign, that she had ended up exactly where people might have predicted she would end up. And so, her mind, in whatever desperate and cornered state it had found itself in, had landed on me. She said she had not planned it in any calculated long-term way. It was not a scheme she had constructed carefully over weeks. It was something that had grown out of panic, out of the terrible pressure of having no good options and needing to find something that would explain away the truth. I was the easiest target. I was in the family. I was close enough that the accusation would be plausible to people who were already primed to believe the worst under pressure. And, she admitted in a voice so low I almost could not hear it, she had told herself that it would force the family to take action in a way that simply saying she did not know who the father was never would have. She had not fully thought through what it would do to me, or perhaps she had thought about it and decided it did not matter. She could not fully explain even to herself which of those things was true. Donna listened to all of this without moving. When Vanessa finished, Donna sat in silence for a long moment, and then she asked one question. "Did you think about what this would do to my marriage?" Vanessa looked at her sister. Her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry," she said again. "That's not what I asked you," Dana said. "I asked if you thought about it." Vanessa did not answer. Robert cleared his throat. He shifted in his seat. He was a proud man, and what was happening in that room was requiring him to do something that went against the deepest grain of his character. He looked at me. He held my gaze for a moment, and I could see how much it cost him. "Marcus," he said, "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. I waited. "I was wrong," he said. "I should not have thrown you out of my house. I should not have believed what I was told without question. I am sorry." They were the right words. They were the words I had needed to hear. But sitting there in that chair listening to them, I discovered something that surprised me. I had spent 4 weeks imagining that an apology would fix something. I'd spent 4 weeks believing that if I could just get the people in this room to understand the truth, the weight I was carrying would lift. And now the truth was on the table, and the apology had been spoken, and the weight was still there. Because apologies restore the record. They do not restore the time. Linda reached across and touched my arm briefly. She said she was sorry too, and she meant it. I could see that she meant it. And then Dana looked at me. Her eyes were full of something complicated and full and difficult to name. She did not speak for a moment. "Marcus," she said finally, "I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder for you." Those words landed differently than the others. Those words I felt somewhere deep. "I should have believed you," she said. "I should have stood next to you from the start, and I didn't, and I have to live with that." I looked at her. This woman I had loved for over a decade, this woman I had built a life with, this woman who had packed a bag and left me alone in our house with nothing but silence and accusation. I did not respond immediately, because what I was feeling in that moment was not simple. There was love there, undeniably. But there was also something else, a kind of sadness that had nothing to do with anger. A quiet grief for the way something between us had cracked, and the understanding that even if it could be repaired, it would never look exactly the same as it had before. We left the clinic in separate cars that evening. Donna drove behind me most of the way home, and when we pulled into the driveway, I sat in my car for a moment before getting out. She waited on the front step until I reached her. We went inside together. We did not talk much that night. We sat on the couch and she put her head on my shoulder, and we stayed like that for a long time without saying anything. Sometimes silence means emptiness. Sometimes it means something else entirely. That night, I think it meant that two people were trying to find their way back to each other through something that had hurt them both in different ways. Vanessa left the family meeting and went to stay with a friend. She did not come home to her parents' house for several weeks. Eventually, she reached out to Dana through a letter, a handwritten letter, several pages long, in which she apparently said things that were more honest and more complete than what she had managed in the room with all of us present. Dana showed me parts of it, not all of it, but enough for me to understand that Vanessa was genuinely broken by what she had done, not just by being caught, but by the actual weight of it. I never received a personal letter from Vanessa. She did call me once, about 6 weeks after the meeting. The call lasted about 4 minutes. She cried almost the entire time. She said she had no excuse and that she was not asking for forgiveness, only for me to know that she understood the damage she had caused. I said I had heard her. I did not say I forgave her, because I was not ready to say that, and I was not going to say it if I did not mean it. I told her to take care of herself. And then the call ended. Daniel, the actual father of the child, was eventually confronted by Vanessa with the medical documentation she now had. I was not present for that conversation, and I do not know the exact details of how it went. What I know is that within a few weeks there were conversations involving lawyers and formal acknowledgments of paternity. The man who had told Vanessa to handle it alone and had threatened to deny everything found that denying everything was no longer a viable option when the documentation existed and when Vanessa was no longer willing to stay silent. He was not a good man, but he was, in the end, accountable. Vanessa chose to continue the pregnancy. She had the baby, a girl, about 5 months after all of this. I know because Dana told me. I have not met the child. I do not know whether I ever will. That is a part of the story that is still unwritten. Dana and I did the work of rebuilding. It was not fast and it was not clean, and there were many nights when I lay awake wondering whether what we were building would hold. We continued with Dr. Okafor for months. We had conversations that were difficult and honest in ways our marriage had perhaps never been before. Conversations about trust and fear and what it means to stand by someone when everything in your world is pointing toward doubt. Dana was honest with me about what she had felt in those weeks, about the fear that had made her pull back, about the way her family's certainty had crowded out her own belief in me. And I was honest with her about the damage that had done, about the particular loneliness of being doubted by the person you have built your entire life around. What I want you to understand is that the hardest part of this story was not Vanessa's accusation. The hardest part was what happened in the aftermath. The accusation was sudden and brutal, but it was one moment. The aftermath was weeks and weeks of slow erosion. It was the daily experience of moving through a life that looked normal on the outside while feeling completely hollow on the inside. It was watching my wife look at me with uncertainty when she should have looked at me with trust. It was the casual, almost offhand way that a lie can spread through a community and attach itself to a person's name. I have thought a great deal since then about why Vanessa did what she did. Not to excuse it. There is no excuse for it. But to understand it, because understanding it was the only way I could begin to release some of the anger I carried. What I came to was this. Vanessa was a person who had never developed the capacity to face consequences directly. Her entire life, the people around her, had absorbed her consequences for her. Her parents had protected her from the outcomes of her own choices for so long that when she finally found herself facing something too large to be absorbed by anyone else, she simply did what she had always done. She looked for someone to take the weight. She just happened to choose me. That does not make it forgivable. It makes it human in the worst possible way. And human things, even the worst of them, can sometimes be understood even when they cannot be forgiven. My relationship with Robert and Linda changed after all of this. We are not enemies. We see each other on occasion. There's a politeness between us that functions adequately. But the ease that used to exist is gone, and I do not think it is coming back. Robert is a man who carries guilt poorly. He processes it by becoming quieter and more formal, and that is how he is with me now, quiet and formal. I accept it. I do not require his warmth. What I required from him was the acknowledgement that he had been wrong, and he gave me that. As for Dana and me, we are still together. I want to say that clearly because this story could easily lead you to assume otherwise. We are still together. We are a different version of together than we were before. But we are together. Some things between us are better than they were before the dinner, because the conversations we had in the aftermath of it forced us to be more honest than we had perhaps been before. And some things are simply different, carrying the faint watermark of a period we both wish had never happened. Marriage is not a static thing. It is not the same on the day you turned 40 as it was on the day you stood at the altar. It changes shape around the things that happen to it. Ours changed shape around this, and we are still figuring out exactly what it looks like now. What I know for certain is that I am not the same man I was before that November dinner. I am harder in some ways, and softer in others. I'm more careful about assumptions, both the ones other people make about me and the ones I make about other people. I'm less willing to simply accept things at face value and more willing to ask questions. I have learned that the people who love you are not always the people who will automatically stand in your corner. Sometimes love comes with conditions that only become visible under extreme pressure. And when you see those conditions clearly, you have to decide what to do with that knowledge. I have also learned something about truth. My mother told me that night I called her from the kitchen floor that truth was slower than lies, but stronger. She was right. The lie moved fast. It spread through the family before I had even driven home from that dinner. It reached neighbors and acquaintances before I had figured out how to respond. It did its damage quickly and efficiently, the way all destructive things do. But the truth was patient. It waited in a medical clinic in a sealed envelope. It waited for the right moment, the right room, the right set of people. And when it finally arrived, it did not just correct the record, it revealed everything. Not just my innocence, but the fear behind the accusation, the weakness behind the cruelty, the complicated human mess that had produced the lie in the first place. I do not know if the people who heard the rumors about me ever heard the correction. I suspect most of them did not. The world is generally much better at spreading the story than it is at spreading the ending. There are probably people in my orbit who still carry some faint version of the original accusation in their memory, some vague sense that there was something complicated about me at some point, some unanswered question that was never fully resolved in their minds. I've made peace with that, mostly. You cannot control what lives in other people's heads. You can only control what lives in your own. What lives in mine is this. I was accused of something I did not do. I was abandoned by people who should have known better. I was humiliated and doubted and left to prove the unprovable with nothing but my own integrity to stand on. And I survived it. Not because I was particularly strong or particularly clever, but because the truth was on my side, and eventually the truth showed up. If you are going through something that feels impossible right now, if you are carrying an accusation or a betrayal or a loss that feels like it has permanently changed the shape of your life, I want you to hold on to one thing. The truth is slower than lies, but it is stronger, and it almost always arrives in the end. My name is Marcus, and that is my story.